Welcome to our WNET webinar, Leverage Changes in Payments to Position You for Career Growth. Thank you for joining us today. Our webinar will start momentarily. Welcome to our WNET webinar, Leverage Changes in Payments to Position You for Career Growth. Thank you for joining us today. Our webinar will start momentarily. Good afternoon and welcome to WNET's webinar, Leverage Changes in Payments to Position You for Career Growth. I'm Liesl Moffat, the Executive Director of WNET, the Women's Network in Electronic Transactions. We are the premier professional organization dedicated to empowering women in payments. Through a powerful network of dedicated volunteers, we provide our members with national and regional programming, networking, and peer mentoring, which is uniquely designed specifically to help you achieve greater professional success, influence, and parity, regardless of where you are along your career path. Today we bring you a moderated panel discussion featuring 3 women who are true payments industry leaders. Your moderator today is Joan Herbig, CEO of ControlScan. Joan's panelists include Holli Targan, attorney and partner at Jaffe, Raitt, Heuer, and Weiss, PC, and Deana Rich, founder and president of Deana Rich Consulting. Together, they will share how they leveraged market shifts and industry changes to propel their careers forward. They will discuss a few of the most recent developments in the payments industry and how you can position yourself to seize opportunities they present. You will be able to propose your questions to our panelists, and they will attempt to answer them at the end of the presentation. Some of what they share may surprise you, and all that they share will empower you. Before I hand over the presentation, just a few housekeeping remarks. Please note that all attendees are muted. If you have questions, please post them using the questions tool on your webinar dashboard. Holli, Deana, and Joan will answer as many questions as the time permits. Now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure that I introduce Joan Herbig, Holli Targan, and Deana Rich.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Liesl, for that introduction. My name is Joan Herbig, and I'm CEO of ControlScan. I am excited to be here today, both in the capacity as moderator and participant, and also excited to be joined by 2 fabulous women. They are fellow payments industry veterans. We all also serve as WNET board members, and most importantly, I'm happy to call them friends. So welcome, Holli and Deana.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Thank you very much, Joan.
You're joining us from Michigan. Deana is in LA, and I am in Atlanta. So we're spread all over the U.S. today to talk with our participants in the webinar. So let me now just cover the objectives of today's webinar. First of all, we are going to spend the first segment of the webinar sharing some stories. So we're here today to talk about how changes in our industry or in the businesses in which we've been involved had given us the opportunity to propel our careers. So we're going to start by sharing anecdotes, a few stories, war stories along the way that hopefully will be helpful to you as you think about embracing change and advancing your own careers. The second part of the webinar, we're going to turn to changes and challenges that are occurring in our industry, the industry that we work in and day out. And one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that we use a lot of acronyms in our business. So we're going to do our best to make sure that we define terms as we go along the way. But most importantly, we're going to point out some occurrences in the industry over the last 6 months that will hopefully educate you, but also show you that these can be topics that you can become experts in and hopefully help to become more valuable within your own organization. And then finally, we will answer your questions. Joining me here today in Atlanta is Catherine Matarazzo. She's going to be helping call through the questions that you pose to us, and in the end, we'll have a segment that allows us to address those. So with no further ado, turning to our first agenda item, which is sharing our stories, I'm going to turn the podium over to Deana Rich, who is going to share a few stories of hers, both from the past and more recent history, that explain how she was able to use change very effectively. So Deana, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joan. And thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel today. I'm very excited to actually be able to tell some of the stories. They're funny, to me anyway, and they really do show how I was able to take things that were happening in my career growth and change and use them to my benefit. And knowing your stories as well, Holli and Joan, I can't wait to hear them again. So I have 2 stories I've chosen for everybody here. The first one was more in the beginning of my bank card career, well, in the exact beginning of my bank card career, and one that's more recent. And I chose 2 different stories so that I would be able to really point out that you have to pay attention to what's happening no matter what point in your career you are in at that moment. So the first one was back in the late 80s. I was working in banking and in actuality had gone back to banking based on a couple of bad career decisions I had made. So I went back to the safety and soundness of what I thought was banking. And I was actually selling deposit products, which is not an easy thing to do and certainly wasn't easy to do back in the late 80s. So I wasn't very good at it. Our bank's products ended up being products that weren't as good as others. So I ended up pointing people to other banks rather than my own. So knowing that our bank was not going to change, I was fearing that there were issues, but we had a really good product that needed to be cleaned up, but it was a great product, merchant bank card. I didn't know a lot about it, but I knew that when I went to my customers and they wanted to accept credit cards, we had great rates, we had this great department, but it needed to be changed, it needed to be fixed because we couldn't get applications through. Even back in the 80s, this happened. So I was kind of going through trying to figure out how to change what was happening to me in this bank or my challenges in trying to sell these products. And I got called into the president's office. And I knew that this wasn't good. And I feared that he was going to probably give me the axe because I wasn't doing a good job selling, at least not for us. I was selling well for other banks, but none of us got paid for that. So I went in knowing that what I was going to do was offer up to him that there was this department that needed to be organized, and I'm good at that. There was this department that needed to be able to be put out in the forefront because it was a great piece that the bank had to offer, and that was the merchant bank card department. So I will tell you, I actually, back in those days, got on my car phone. It wasn't a cell phone like they are today. It was this big car phone that was like a brick, picked it up, called my mom and said, "Mom, I'm going in to be fired today, but I'm not going to let him do it. I'm going to tell him why he should keep me, that he should put me in charge of merchant banking, and that I'm going to turn it around." And in fact, that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. He said, "You know, none of you are doing good in this sales department. I'm going to wipe out all of you." I offered up my solution, and he loved it, and that was that. So I took over the department. I changed it. I organized it. I turned the profitability around. And back in those days, I actually took all of our paper merchants and turned them into electronic merchants. And now we had a thriving department. It's something I'd never done before, stepped outside of my comfort zone, and I did it. And then when the CFO of the company went to another bank and they started up a merchant bank card department at that bank, the first person he called was me. So having taken that step earlier in my career to organize and to get my thoughts together, walk into the president's office and tell him what I should be doing, really changed the entire trajectory of my career. I went from typical banking to bank card. So to me, that's one of my favorite stories, although the car phone is probably my favorite part about it. It's not the part that helps you learn. The part that helps you learn is to really not accept defeat if that's what you're looking at, and to find a way to circumnavigate it. So the second story that I thought was of interest as we were talking through this was much more recent. In 2011, Visa and MasterCard changed their rules about payment facilitators. In fact, they opened up the entire face-to-face market. Well, as you guys know on this call, because we are all from this industry, when Visa and MasterCard make a change like that, markets are created, jobs are created, a lot of stuff starts to churn and occur because they're so powerful. So I dusted off my knowledge of payment facilitators. I had dealt with IPSPs, Internet Payment Service Providers, since 2002, and actually before that, but since 2002 when Visa came up with those rules, dusted off what I knew, started really diving in and researching, because based on this change in the rules, I knew a lot was going to happen. So I wanted to make sure I was on top of not only the current rule change, but the existing rules as they were. So as I'm doing this, I get a call from who is now my current business partner, and he called and said, "Hey, I have been contacted by somebody about this new payment facilitator thing. I don't know anything about it. but I do know that I'm going to need to know about the rules and the risks involved. And the person that I know that can do that is you. So we started talking about it, and sure enough, we were able to build a business around this entire new change. We started getting clients. I got some, he got some, and we started working together on this, and we decided to partner. I will tell you, one of the most enjoyable things about it is as things were growing, this was 2011, towards the end of 2011, beginning of 2012, we decided to make a go of it. But I, being the conservative one of the group, put the brakes on and said, well, we have ETA coming up and I'm really busy, so let's wait till after ETA to do this. And at that point, my business partner said, wait a minute, we have to launch at ETA. So I listened to him, and we took our skill set, we took the knowledge we had gained and everything we knew about payment facilitators, and we launched at ETA in 2012, which was 4 years ago. And we have built an entire business, and again, changed the trajectory of my career based on paying attention to change. And I think that if there's one message here, it's pay attention to change and always learn new things. Just like the diagram says, jump out of your comfort zone, learn new things, and you will find that you're always being excited by your career and the next steps. Joan, those are my stories.
Awesome, Deana. Thank you so much. So just to summarize, you took some risk, you learned and studied and became an expert, and you paid attention to the change around you. And for you, it significantly advanced your career a couple of times. So that's great. I'm going to turn it now to Holli, who will tell a story of her own and introduce us. We'll get to know Holli a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about what you do and a story for the audience here.
Sure, thank you. So I was really excited about the topic of this webinar because this sort of totally describes the entirety of my career. I'm a lawyer, but the scope of my career has been completely shaped by changes and the opportunities that they presented. At an early stage, I worked in-house as an attorney at a bank. And I supported the payments and the merchant acquiring business at the bank. But I could see from contracts that were coming across my desk, even from companies in the industry, that attorneys drafting those contracts really did not understand the business. And this was back in the very early 90s. So it was the point at which the ISO world was just developing, and banks, merchant acquiring banks, were starting to utilize outside companies like ISOs, like processors, like front ends to do much of the work that needed to be done to acquire a merchant transaction. So I could see while I was sitting there in my little bank office that from those contracts that were coming across my desk that these lawyers had no clue about really how this business worked. So from that point, I decided to seize that opportunity and to go out on my own and specialize in payments issues. So when ISOs were just coming into the picture, I targeted those companies. And there evolved a whole set of requirements, both card brand requirements and legal requirements on the ISO business and on companies that were supporting merchant acquiring banks. And as they blossomed, more and more card brand regulation came about that needed interpretation for industry companies. So I made myself become very knowledgeable about both the card brand requirements and about the legal requirements that were being imposed, state and federal laws and regulations that were being imposed on those types of companies. And then the industry began to blossom and shift. So for example, with industry consolidation, mergers and acquisitions became an opportunity because my clients were selling portfolios and they were selling their own businesses, and some of them were buying other companies and portfolios. And so I had to become aware of the ins and outs of purchase agreements and the representations and warranties that are made and all the due diligence that had to go on to figure out if a merchant portfolio was a good risk or not. And so with that new development, I sort of blossomed into that area of the law, that being mergers and acquisitions. And some of my clients branched out into the cash advance space. So when that happened, I had to become knowledgeable about that world with a whole new set of laws, lending laws, and the importance of structuring those types of transactions correctly. And so that became another development and another opportunity. And some on the call may remember when the Durbin Amendment was proposed and the controversy surrounding that Durbin Amendment was swirling about. And I decided that, you know, because it was so important to the industry, I really needed to dig deep and figure out what that was all about. So I became very knowledgeable about the regulation that was proposed, and then the ultimate regulation, even going up and talking to the Federal Reserve Board about that proposed regulation. There I was, that was the year that I was president of the ETA, so I had the opportunity to do that. Another development that has occurred is in the industry is financial technology companies. They realized not very long ago that they needed specialized payments expertise. So that provided me the opportunity to become conversant in their legal issues. And most recently, as Deana has indicated, when Visa and MasterCard changed their rules about merchant aggregators and payment facilitators became a real business opportunity, that presented a whole new development that had specialized concerns. So in each of these different stages, as the industry has developed and as my clients have branched out into each of these different areas, that provided opportunities for me to become an expert in those areas and provide those kinds of services to them. So I guess you know, my advice here would be to really take a good look on the horizon to see what's coming up. You can do that through news feeds, through news publications to see what's going on, and immerse yourself in those businesses so that when they become a real issue, you're prepared and that you can present yourself as an expert both to your existing company and then to perhaps even new companies that you might want to do business with.
That's awesome, Holli. You use the word expertise and knowledge a lot, and so the theme that I heard from you is to become an expert, to learn what you can, and then to use that to your advantage both within your company and externally. Be sought out as an expert on specific topics. And there's also this point about being able to anticipate what's going to be important. So you definitely have to keep your eyes and ears open and be able to have a good sense for where you need to dig in. So thank you for that. And lastly, I'll tell a little anecdote about myself. This is Joan Herbig, CEO of ControlScan. I started my career, I actually graduated from college with a degree in French. And for the first few years I worked in an insurance company and realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. At the time, personal computers were just starting to come into the workplace. And I don't know why I had this sense, but it's kind of to the point that Holli was talking about, but I felt like there was something related to these personal computers that was going to be really important. So I decided at that point to go back to college and start to study computer science. I took courses at night. And right about the time that I finished my first or second course, we were transferred to Lexington, Kentucky from Raleigh. And I decided to actually pursue a full-time degree in computer science, which was a big departure for me. I was a liberal arts. I studied most of the time language, obviously French, and writing. And so to study math and sciences, I felt very ill prepared, but it was a hill I wanted to take. So I went to school and I got a degree in computer science and ended up getting a master's degree. And once I graduated, I took my first job was a customer support rep in a technology company. By that time, we'd moved to Atlanta. And as a result of just the growth in the company, I had the opportunity to move into other roles. So I moved from customer support into marketing and then product management, and ultimately ran a product line within this company. I ended up leaving that company and joining another Atlanta-based technology company, and eventually became VP of Marketing. The company was sold, and most of the executives left the company. They cashed out and they decided to pursue other opportunities. And we had been subsumed into the company that bought us as a division. And one day, the gentleman who was responsible for the company that acquired us came to me and said that he wanted me to consider taking over the role as president of the division. And I was looking him in the eye, sitting across the table, I'll never forget it, and going through my head in what was probably 10 seconds, but to me seemed like 5 minutes, I was thinking, I've never run a finance department. I don't know anything about running a customer support organization. I've never had responsibility for sales or sales numbers. I've never run a development team. All of my experience was in marketing, and I thought to myself, I'm woefully unprepared for this. But looking at him, I said, absolutely, I would love to take that role. And so I took over as president of this division inside a larger company, and it was true, I was woefully unprepared. I made every mistake in the book, and I really learned through the School of Hard Knocks. But in the end, this company that had acquired us decided that for a variety of reasons, they wanted to divest our business. And so they gave me the responsibility to go out and find a buyer. And we decided to instead seek private equity funding, take the company back out, reclaim our brand and our name in the marketplace, and relaunch the company. And we were able to find a financial backer. They made me CEO, so it catapulted me to my first CEO role. And we ran the business for 4 years and ended up selling it. I then had another CEO role, and now I'm at ControlScan, where I've been for 8.5 years. So the point for me is that I've found at various points throughout my career where there's been change, and in the case where I became president of the division, the change was really that I was the last man standing. So they didn't have many other choices, but I didn't cower from it, even knowing that being unsuccessful in that role might lead to me being fired or worse. I'm not sure, but I was able to assess that I would be comfortable with the worst case scenario. And so raising my hand, saying yes, putting myself in a situation that was full of fear and being uncomfortable led to not only my first CEO role and a successful exit, but 2 subsequent CEO roles and a lot more preparation. I think I'm much better at my job than I was when I first started out. So lean into saying yes even when you really don't want to say it. So that brings us to the end of our first section, which was let's tell a few stories, get to know the panelists, learn about how we've embraced change throughout our career in order to advance it. And we are now going to talk about some current industry trends. We want to educate you a bit on these trends, and we want to show examples of how you might become experts around these trends in your organization to add value. And I notice that we don't have any questions yet, so certainly take a moment to jot down some questions that you might want to ask of Deana and Holli or myself. We'd be happy to answer them. And we're going to turn now to, I believe it is Deana, and she is going to talk about AML, anti-money laundering as it relates to ISOs. So Deana, please go ahead.
No, thank you very much. And ladies, I loved hearing the story. Thanks for sharing a little piece of yourself with everyone today. So AML, anti-money laundering as it relates to ISOs. AML, first, I'm going to explain to you what that is, because I'm not sure we all know anti-money laundering, AML, but what does that really mean? What does it mean to have an AML program in your organization, whatever type of organization you may be in? Basically, for AML, the goal there is to know your customer. That's the basic tenet of AML, KYC. And the reason for that is so that you keep terrorists out of the system, you keep drug dealers out of the system, you keep human traffickers out of the system. You basically don't allow a financial system to be used for illegal activities. So a good AML program has 4 basic pillars. You have to have a policy and procedure, which includes good CIP. I'm going to use as many acronyms as I can, which is Customer Identification Program, that has a good CIP program that is tailored to your specific client base and that has enhanced due diligence, so it's risk-based for certain types of clients. So good policies. The second pillar, you must have a compliance officer. You must have an AML compliance officer who is responsible for the training, which is third pillar. You must have ongoing employee training, minimum level, and then higher levels for employees that have risks or jobs that touch more. And then the fourth and final pillar to a good AML policy or program is independent testing. You must have independent testing of your program to make sure that it truly will keep money launderers out of your system. So how does this relate back to us in BankCard, and how does this relate to you and your career? Well, in the past, ISOs didn't really think about, or any of us, unless we were at the banking level, and even then, if we were in the BankCard department, we didn't think about KYC, knowing our customer. We just thought about getting merchants' accounts signed and putting terminals out there and getting processing going. So we would get an application signed, we'd get a photocopy of a driver's license, and we'd get a picture of their office and a voided check, and we think we've done everything we needed to do to know that customer. And in reality, if you remember some of those driver's licenses, they were photocopies of photocopies, and by the time you saw it, you could barely read it, and certainly you couldn't see the picture. The voided check might have been a tool back in the day, but with advancements in computers, that's not such a good thing anymore because they're so easy to manufacture. And the pictures turned out more often than not to be Polaroids, which, if you don't know what a Polaroid is, that's a camera that will give you an instant picture the minute you hit click. It shoots the picture out of the camera, and it develops right in front of you. They would be Polaroids of a computer in somebody's bedroom. So what we considered KYC wasn't really good KYC. So as our world's changed, 9/11 hit, and we saw that in actuality our industry was helping terrorists finance their world. So it was kind of scary for us. We weren't paying attention, and in fact we learned more and more in our world. Our credit card processing was being used to sell drugs, and our credit card processing was being used to sell people. So what's happening more and more is that we have to have a good, strong AML program. And some of you may work at companies that require that now. Some of you may work at companies where you're just seeing that come in. And I know if you work at an ISO, your banks are now more than ever asking for you at the ISO to have a good AML program. So here's where the career opportunity is presenting itself. There are not many people in our industry that understand anti-money laundering laws and rules and regulations. They don't understand the Patriot Act. They don't understand BSA, which is the Bank Secrecy Act, which is where some of our rules come from for this. They don't get it. They may come from the banking industry and really get it as it relates to banking, but not as it relates to bank card or credit card processing. So the opportunity here for us, or for anybody in this industry, is to take a look at what a good AML program would look like, what good compliance really means, and it's different than risk monitoring and it's different than underwriting, but understand how those are basis of a good compliance program. And if you know that, you can then build a good compliance program for your company. You will not only steer your career in a forward motion, but you will also help your company. And that is the proverbial win-win. So the compliance bar has been raised for us, and that change actually presents a career opportunity for us.
Awesome, Deana. Thank you very much. I learned some things about AML that I did not know before, so I appreciate that. Now we're going to turn it over to Holli, who is going to talk a little bit about a federal agency that's come on the scene in the last couple of years, the CFPB, and some recent action towards DWALA. So Holli, take it away.
Thank you. So I just want to thank both you and Deana. I am so inspired by your stories, the way you both took incredible risks and embraced the challenges even when you didn't feel comfortable. That's just very cool. So thank you for sharing those stories. So I'm going to talk about the CFPB and the action that they have recently taken against DWALA, which is an online payment system. The CFPB stands for Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're a federal agency that was created a couple of years ago, and part of their charge is to prohibit unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. And they decided a couple weeks ago that DWALA was engaging in unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices and entered into an order with DWALA under which DWALA was required to pay a $100,000 civil money penalty and also fix the deficiencies that the CFPB identified.
Holli, can I interrupt for 1 second? Can you explain who DWALA is in case the audience doesn't know?
Sure. They're a company that operates an online payment system. So you can go on their website and you can have them transfer money from you to another individual or to a company.
Thank you.
Okay. So what the CFPB found was that DWALA was representing on their website and in their materials in trying to get people to use their service. They were representing that they employed reasonable and appropriate measures to protect data, that their network was safe and secure, that their security practices exceeded industry standards, and this was right on the DWALA website when people would go onto the website to sign up for their service. They represented that all consumer information was encrypted and that DWALA was PCI compliant. But the CFPB found that that was not the case, that they did not encrypt and that they were not PCI compliant. And the CFPB further found that DWALA failed to adopt and implement appropriate data security policies or plans regarding the collection and the maintenance and the storage of consumer personal information. They failed to conduct adequate regular risk assessments to identify the risks to consumer personal information. They failed to train employees on the responsibilities for handling and protecting that information. They failed to encrypt consumer personal information, and that they failed to test the security of the apps that they were using prior to releasing those apps to the public. And therefore, the CFPB ordered that they were no longer DWALA was no longer able to misrepresent the their data security practices and that they must adopt security measures to protect consumers' personal information. And in particular, they really got down into the weeds in this order. They required DWALA to establish a data security plan and data security policies and conduct data security risk assessments twice annually. They were ordered to conduct mandatory employee training on the company's data security policies. They were ordered to develop security patches to fix their vulnerabilities and to develop customer identity authentication at the registration phase and before effecting a funds transfer. They were required to develop procedures to select service providers capable of maintaining the security practices, and they were ordered to obtain an annual data security audit. So this action is really interesting for a number of reasons. Number one, the CFPB took this action not upon a data breach. I mean, usually what we have seen is the FTC going after companies or private suits being levied against companies for security breaches. Here, there was no security breach. It was just the CFPB claiming that because DWALA had represented certain things in promoting their service, and those things were not true, that violated the CFPB Act. So the implications for the industry are to make sure that, you know, the representations are accurate, and all representations are accurate that a company makes about their security practices. And this is just an example of how becoming a subject matter expert on this type of issue will enable you to provide value to your organization and to other organizations as well. So that's all I have, and I will now turn it back over to Joan.
Thank you, Holly. I believe that this particular action by the CFPB is one of the first actions the first forays they've made in the data security arena. I'm going to talk about it. You mentioned the FTC, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Federal Trade Commission because they've been more active, particularly recently, in our industry and specifically focused in the area of data breaches. We know that data breaches are in the news day in and day out, with the Target breach a couple of years ago, which was the first of the high-profile breaches. We seem to see high-profile breaches occurring more and more frequently, and when that happens, the government often feels like they have to get involved. As an industry, we formed, through the card brands coming together in 2004, the PCI Council, the Payment Card Industry Council, who set a standard around data security called the PCI DSS, Data Security Standard, and we have felt that self-regulating and policing ourselves through the PCI standard would help keep the government at bay, but we've seen the FTC become more active. The FTC stands for the Federal Trade Commission, and they too are an agency. They've been around much longer than the agency Holly was talking about, and their mission is a dual mission. They are there to protect consumers and to promote competition. So as I said, over the last year, we've seen them become much more active and aggressive, and I'm going to talk about a couple of cases that are interesting in this regard. One of them is an action that the FTC brought against a company, which is called LabMD. They're a company based here in Atlanta. The FTC alleged that they did not take appropriate security measures to protect patient data, and this company, although it was a small company, decided to fight the FTC. Most companies don't, because usually they don't win, but they decided to do it. And they were able to actually win against the FTC. They were able to prove that the claims the FTC had that these practices had caused significant consumer injury was not the case. But sadly, even though they won, the company went out of business because they did not have the resources to both fight the FTC and continue to grow and run their business. And it's an interesting case in intrigue because the story lives on. Last week, it was discovered that a key source to the FTC in this case was implicated for supplying false information to the FTC, which was one of the reasons why the FTC went after this company. So this will live on because apparently this source was someone who provided tips to the FTC on nearly 100 companies around data breach. So we'll see what the fallout is there. The second FTC action that many have heard about is Wyndham, a hotel chain who was the victim of sophisticated cyber attacks between 2008 and 2009. The FTC went after them for having unfair or not up to snuff security practices that resulted in hundreds of thousands of consumers being impacted through the card breaches that occurred there. With Wyndham, the important thing to remember here is that they did not settle with the FTC, or actually they settled with the FTC. So unlike LabMD, who fought the FTC, they decided to settle, which means that they did not admit any wrongdoing. But as a result of that, the FTC has required them to do a number of things over a period of 20 years. And one of those things is that they must obtain annual security audits, and those have to conform to the PCI data security standards. So this is the first time that the FTC has specifically pointed to the standard that our industry put in place, PCI, and we think that is a positive development because it points to the fact that the PCI is being embraced as at least a basic minimum standard that companies need to have in place. The last thing I'll mention about the FTC is an announcement that they made on March the 7th. They ordered on March the 7th 9 different companies who are in the PCI space. These are organizations that provide services in the PCI space to provide detailed information about how they assess their clients' compliance with the PCI standard. And these 9 companies received the order, and they range anywhere from large accounting firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers to security-focused companies like Foresight. And the FTC is requiring them over a short period of time to provide detailed information about how the assessors, what processes they use, how they go about providing written proposals. And interestingly, they've asked for detailed information about communications between the companies and the customer, other third parties like the PCI Council, the payment card network, issuing or acquiring banks. So they're trying to understand what are the processes that are being used and are those processes up to snuff. This idea of going out and doing an industry study is something that the FTC has only done once before in another industry. So it's very early, but it will be interesting to see what kind of an impact this has on the PCI landscape and on both the companies that provide PCI services and the companies that use PCI services, whether it's the merchant themselves, but also acquirers, ISOs, others who recommend these services to their merchant bases. So that helps you understand a little bit about how the FTC is becoming a more important player in our space. And just to put a bow on a lot of what we've said here, we have an individual within our company who has taken it upon himself, even though it's not his job, to become an expert in all matters related to the FTC, for example. And within our company, we find that salespeople are going to him, I go to him, we're finding our customers reaching out to him, we see our board members taking a special interest in what he has to say, and all this started with his own initiative to go out and become this expert, and now he is seen as a subject matter expert, and it certainly will advance his career within our company, but I think certainly open up a lot of career options for him. And again, his own initiative is what drove that. So that brings us to the final slide here, which is our takeaways. And Holly, why don't you spend a minute with your takeaway, and we'll just move through those, and then we'll turn to a couple of questions as we have time.
Sure. So my takeaway is to, as you can read it on the screen, make yourself the expert to stand out from the crowd. You know, just as exemplified by Joan's example, that individual in her company has taken it upon himself to make himself the expert on all things FTC. And everyone wants to know about that. It's a new development. He has seized that development to take advantage of it, and it will just serve to open doors for him. So that would be my piece of advice to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. Deana?
So along those same lines, the thing to always remember is nothing is as consistent as change. So don't get complacent. Don't think what you're doing today will be enough for tomorrow. Again, Joan, perfect example, perfect timing. The person at your company that has taken it upon himself to understand all things FTC, I would say even 3 years ago that wasn't as important to us. Certainly 5 years ago, nobody even thought about it. Today, it's something every single person needs to pay attention to. Your employee saw that change and made himself the expert in that change and is doing it. So remember, nothing is as consistent as change.
Absolutely true. I bet your grandmother said that too, Deana.
You've heard me say that before. Yes, you did. It was her.
So my takeaway is leaning into yes. I think we often, when asked to take on additional responsibility, we might want to sit and cogitate, ponder, think about what could go wrong. And my advice would be to say yes. There's plenty of time to figure out what can go wrong later, but lean into the places, the times when you get a knot in your stomach and you think you really don't want to do it. Say yes, because it's through those experiences that you're really going to see growth, both growth in your expertise, your skill set, but also in your career. And with that, I have a couple of questions, and I'm going to pose the first one, Holly, to you. And this has to do with the CFPB that we talked about versus the FTC. It seems like there's a little bit of an overlap between what they're responsible for. Can you clarify when the CFPB gets involved versus the FTC, or is it conceivable that they both go after, be involved in the same particular situation?
Yeah, they're sort of, so any time a federal administrative agency takes regulatory action, it's always directly as a result of the law that they're charged with administering. And so the FTC has the Federal Trade Act, which permits them, as you pointed out, Joan, to prohibit unfair and deceptive acts and practices. And the CFPB is more consumer-oriented. So it's a similar type of charge that they have from the federal statutes, but it's slightly different in that they're really going after deceptive and abusive. It's a slight difference. Deceptive and abusive acts and practices that will affect consumers. And as far as whether they would both go after the same type of company, I think, from my understanding, is that there is some coordination that goes on between the agencies as to which is going to go after, you know, a certain type of objectionable practice by a company. So I am not aware of a situation where both the FTC and the CFPB have brought actions against the same company, but that's not to say it could not happen.
Awesome. I knew as a lawyer you'd have an excellent answer to that question. Now I have one for Deana, and this has to do with presenting yourself as an expert. And you talked about gaining knowledge. Did you really feel you were an expert when you started to present yourself that way? And how did you get the nerve to call yourself an expert on a new topic?
That's a great question. And it's funny, and it goes back to Joan leaning into yes. No, I wasn't an expert when the topic was new and I was trying to figure it out along with everybody else. But what I did commit to was learning it better than anybody else. And before answering any questions on any topic, I do as much research as you might imagine somebody would do writing a thesis. I make sure I understand it from every angle, and then I know I'm an expert when I am presenting answers to the questions coming my way. So you don't just wake up one morning and become an expert, but you work really hard and then you are one.
Great answer, and I know Holli and I and you, Deana, we sit on panels together, and one of the things that we three have in common is that we tend to be very good preparers. So we are prepared in advance. That's one of our trademarks. So I think making sure you are prepared ahead of time is something that gives you more confidence. So I highly recommend that. We have a question here which is related to how do you gain information. So the questioner is asking, can you share a list of news feeds or websites that we can reference for current payment-related information? And I'll start, and then I think it would be interesting to hear from the two of you. Where do you go for information? So for me, I have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal online. And I've had it for years, and I use the Wall Street Journal as a very important source for business and technology-related information. I feel like they do very good reporting there, and so that is one source I use. I know the Merchant Acquirers Committee also sends out news articles of interest, and that's something we circulate internally, and I always find those to be very interesting. The other place that I would say I turn from time to time are industry-related publications like the Green Sheet, payments.com, that type of thing. Deana or Holli, do you want to jump in on where can our participants go to get data, get information?
Yeah, so this is Holli. From the beginning, because initially I worked at a bank regulatory agency, the Comptroller of the Currencies Office in Washington, D.C., I have been reading the American Banker for literally 30 years, every single day. I read it now. I get it primarily online, and they have consolidated their publications with ISO and Agent and some of the other industry publications. So I read those vociferously, absolutely every day. There's also Digital Transactions is another source, a news feed that I read every day. And like MAC, the ETA has a weekly news feed that I read every day. Deana, how about you?
I'll tell you, I think you two have hit just about all the most important ones, and it's funny because I had Wall Street Journal, American Banker are big deals when it comes to the news. But what I also want to remind everybody is this is something that you might put aside and say, I'm too busy with my daily job, I can't read. You should actually schedule first thing in your day, minimum half-hour period to read. Even if you do it before you leave your house to go to work, this is something that will further your career every day. It's really important.
Great advice.
Yeah.
So we are at the end of our webinar, right on time here. I think we've covered a lot of great topics. I hope that each of you has gotten to know the three of us a little bit better, learned some things about our careers and how we've embraced change, but also been introduced to a few topics that you might want to explore a little bit more. I want you to know that you are eligible for CPP credits. The presentation will be emailed to everyone as well as a recording, and it will also be available on the WNET website. Thank you again for listening here today, and thank you to my panelists. It was always a pleasure, and it was a great pleasure today for me. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Likewise, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.